The room went quiet right after Marianne finished reading the last line. She didn't look at me when she closed the folder, just pressed her hand flat against it, like that was it. Like everything had already been decided before I even walked into the room. "That's what Dad wanted," she said. I was still staring at the document in front of her, not reading it anymore, just looking at my name, barely there. A few lines, a small portion. No control over anything that actually mattered. The house, the accounts, every decision. I felt something sink in my chest. "That doesn't make sense," I said. My voice came out steady, but it didn't feel that way inside. Marianne finally looked up at me, calm, composed, like she had already prepared for this. "It does," she said, "if you understand how he thought." I let out a quiet breath. "I was there," I said. "I took him to his appointments. I handled his medications. I was the one sitting with him when he couldn't even remember what day it was." Caleb shifted beside me, already uncomfortable. Marianne nodded slowly, like I had just confirmed something small. "You were helping," she said. Then she paused, just long enough to make it land. "Not deciding." It didn't feel like an argument. It felt like a correction, like she was putting me back where I belonged. Something tightened in my chest, not sharp, just heavy. Because I knew that feeling. I had known it for years. I leaned back slightly in my chair, trying to keep my voice even. "When was this updated?" I asked. "A few months ago," she said. I frowned. "A few months ago?" She nodded. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. "I was there every week," I said. "How did I not know about this?" Caleb leaned forward. "Maybe we don't need to." "I'm not trying to argue," I said, softer this time. "I just don't understand." Marianne's expression didn't change. "Dad didn't feel the need to run everything by everyone," she said. "He trusted me to handle things." That word again, trusted me. I looked down at the paper, then back at her. Something about that didn't sit right. Because I remembered something else. One afternoon, not that long before things got worse, Dad had been sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers he didn't understand anymore. He pushed them toward me and said, "Can you help me go through this?" Not fix it, not decide it, just go through it. I sat with him for almost 2 hours, explaining the same things more than once because he kept losing track halfway through. At one point, he leaned back and said quietly, "I just want things to stay fair." Fair. Not controlled. Not one-sided. Just fair. I looked back at the document in Marianne's hand. "This doesn't feel like that," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "You don't think you might be reading into it?" The way she said it was calm, careful, and somehow that made it worse. I swallowed and looked down for a second before answering. "I think I know what the last few months actually look like," I said. She held my gaze, then looked away first. "Well," she said, "this is the version he signed." Caleb cleared his throat. "We've all been through a lot," he said. "Maybe we don't need to go through everything right now." I almost agreed. That's what I usually did. Smoothed things over, let it settle. But something about this didn't feel like something that would settle, because this wasn't just about the will. It was about how it got there. I thought about the last 6 months, the hospital visits, the nights he called me because he couldn't sleep, the way he started looking at me before answering anything, like he needed to make sure he was getting it right. And then I thought about Marianne, calling from out of state, talking to doctors, making decisions, always involved, but never actually there in the same way. When exactly was it signed? I asked. Marianne exhaled, just slightly. What are you trying to do right now? She asked. I'm trying to understand how something this big happened without me knowing. Her eyes narrowed just a little. Because you weren't involved in that part, she said. The sentence was simple, but it landed harder than anything else. Not involved. I felt something shift again, because that wasn't new, that was familiar. I thought about all the times over the past year when she stepped in during conversations. He already decided. It's taken care of. You don't need to worry about that. At the time, I told myself she was helping. Now it felt like something else, like I had been placed somewhere, present, but not included. Mr. Klein cleared his throat softly. If there are concerns about the timeline, he said carefully, we can review the documents. Marianne turned slightly toward him. There's no need, she said. Everything was handled properly. He nodded. But there was a pause, a small one, easy to miss. I didn't miss it. And for the first time since the reading started, I felt like I wasn't the only one who noticed something didn't add up. I looked down at my hands, then back at the folder. A few months ago. That didn't fit. Because a few months ago, Dad had started forgetting small things, then bigger ones. He once asked me where his car was while we were standing right next to it. Another time, he asked me to write the date at the top of a page because he said it kept slipping. And somehow, in the middle of all that, he made a clean, confident decision to change everything without ever mentioning it to me. I leaned back slowly. I'd like to see all the documents, I said. Marianne didn't look at me. They're already here. I mean everything, I said. Dates, drafts, any changes. That made her look up again. Why? She asked. The question sounded simple, but I knew what she meant. Why push this? Why not let it go? Why not stay where I've always been? I held her gaze a second longer than usual. Because I don't understand it, I said. It wasn't an accusation, not yet, just the truth. The room went quiet again. Caleb shifted beside her. Marianne leaned back slightly, studying me. Then she said, do whatever you think you need to do. The tone wasn't supportive. It wasn't angry. It was dismissive. Like it wouldn't matter, like I wouldn't follow through. And maybe a part of me used to believe that too. Because this wasn't just about one decision. It was about a pattern. Marianne deciding, Caleb adjusting, and me holding things together. That was how it had always worked. I stood up slowly. I'll follow up, I said to Mr. Klein. He nodded. Marianne didn't say anything else. Neither did Caleb. We walked out together, but it didn't feel like it. Marianne moved ahead, already on her phone. Caleb hesitated like he wanted to say something, then didn't. I walked to my car alone. Sat there for a moment with the engine off, just breathing. Because something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that I could feel it. For the first time, it wasn't just a feeling, it was clear. I had been close enough to matter, but not close enough to be included. And once you see that, it's hard to pretend you don't. I didn't call Marianne, not that day, not the next. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, but not in a dramatic way, just noticing things I hadn't let myself notice before. The way she said certain words, the way she decided where the conversation ended. You were helping, not deciding. It stayed with me longer than anything else. So instead of calling her, I called Mr. Klein. "I'd like to review everything," I said, "not just what was presented." There was a short pause. "Of course," he said. "Come by tomorrow." The next afternoon, I sat across from him again. Same office, same quiet tone. But this time, I wasn't just there to listen. He placed a thicker folder in front of me. "These include earlier versions," he said. I nodded and opened it. At first, it felt like exactly what I expected. Legal language, dates, revisions, nothing that immediately stood out. But then I started noticing the pattern. The earlier versions were balanced. Not perfectly equal, but thoughtful, considered, like someone was trying to make sure no one was left out. I paused on one version in particular. My name was there, not hidden, not minimized, just present, in a way that made sense. "This one," I said quietly. "When was it signed?" "About a year before your father passed." I nodded slowly. That was before things changed, before he started repeating himself, before he began looking at me like he wasn't entirely sure if what he was saying was right. I turned to the final version. And this? A few months later. I didn't look up right away, because I already knew what I was going to ask next. What was his condition like at that point? Mr. Klein didn't answer immediately. "There were signs of cognitive decline," he said carefully. I felt my chest tighten, not in surprise, but in recognition. I had seen it, just not like this. I remembered one afternoon when Dad asked me to go over a bill with him. I explained it once, then again, then a third time. Each time he nodded like he understood, and then 5 minutes later he asked the same question. At the time, I told myself it was normal. Now, it didn't feel that way. "Who was present when this was signed?" I asked. "Your sister," he said, "and a witness." Was I contacted? No. I looked down at the page again. Of course I wasn't, because that wasn't my role. I flipped through a few more pages, then stopped when I saw a note attached to one of the revisions. It mentioned communication, that Marianne had been the primary point of contact, that she coordinated everything. I stared at that line longer than I needed to, because suddenly, a lot of small moments started to shift. The calls she took outside, the way she would step out of the room during visits, the way she came back and said, "It's already handled." At the time, I thought she was helping. Now it felt like she was deciding what I needed to know. "She had power of attorney," I said. Mr. Klein nodded. "Yes." I closed the folder halfway, resting my hand on top of it. "And there were no concerns?" "There were questions," he said. "About what?" "Timing, capacity, influence." I looked at him. "And no one challenged it?" He held my gaze for a moment. "No one formally did." That stayed with me. No one formally did. Because I hadn't. I had been there physically, but not in the places where decisions were actually being made. I sat back in my chair, looking at both versions side by side. One felt like my father. The other felt like something that had been guided. I let out a slow breath. "I want copies of everything," I said. "You'll have them. And I want to understand what it would take to review the final version." He nodded, but his expression shifted slightly. "This will affect your relationship with your family." I thought about that. Then I said, "It already has." On the drive home, I didn't turn on anything. I just sat with the quiet. Not overwhelmed, not confused, just aware. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to smooth things over in my own head. I wasn't trying to explain Marianne's behavior in a way that made it easier to accept. I was just looking at it as it was, consistent, controlled, familiar. That was the part that unsettled me the most. This wasn't new. It just hadn't been this visible before. I thought about growing up, the way Marianne always spoke first, the way decisions were already made before I even knew there was something to decide, the way I told myself it was easier not to push, easier not to complicate things. So I adjusted. Over time, it stopped feeling like a choice. It just became who I was in the family, the one who handled things, the one who kept things steady, the one who didn't make things harder. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. Because now I could see it clearly. That role hadn't just been something I accepted. It had been reinforced, quietly, repeatedly, until it felt natural. I let out a slow breath. Sometimes you don't really understand a family dynamic until something forces you to question it. I never had. Not fully. Not until now. I grabbed the folder and went inside, set it down on the table, and just stood there for a moment, looking at it. Because I knew what it meant. Not just information, not just proof. A decision. I could close it, let things stay the way they were. Or I could follow it all the way through, even if it changed things. I pulled out the chair and sat down, opened the folder again. And this time, I wasn't just reading. I was deciding. I reached for my phone and called Mr. Klein. "I'd like to move forward," I said. There was a brief pause. Then he replied, "All right." And just like that, something I had ignored for years was no longer something I was willing to accept. Marianne didn't reach out after that. No messages, no calls. At first, I thought she was waiting, letting things settle before stepping back in the way she always did, calm, controlled, certain. But the silence stretched, and it didn't feel strategic. It felt like distance. Caleb called a few days later. "You actually went through with it," he said. "I did." "She's upset." I leaned back slightly. "I expected that." "She thinks you're making this harder than it needs to be." I let out a small breath. "It was already hard," I said. "You just didn't feel it." There was a pause. "I didn't think it mattered this much," he admitted. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's the difference," I said. The review process took a few weeks. Slow, careful. Every document checked, every detail confirmed. And I stayed involved this time, not just present, actually involved. Asking questions, reading everything, letting myself notice things I used to ignore. And the more I saw, the clearer it became. The change didn't happen all at once. It built over time. Small adjustments, then larger ones, until the structure was completely different. And all of it happened when Dad was less certain, more dependent. I kept thinking about one moment. He was sitting at the table with a pen in his hand, looking at a document he didn't seem to understand. "I feel like I should know what this means," he said. I told him, "We can go through it together." He nodded. Then his phone rang. Marianne. He answered, and when he hung up, he set the paper aside. "I think it's taken care of," he said. At the time, I didn't question it. Now I understood it differently. When we returned to Mr. Klein's office, everything felt quieter than before, more settled, like the outcome had already been decided somewhere beneath the surface. Marianne sat across from me, still composed, but not as certain. Caleb sat beside her, hands folded. I took my seat. Mr. Klein placed both documents on the table. After reviewing everything, he said, there are procedural concerns with the final version. Marianne didn't react right away, but I saw it, the tension in her expression. The earlier document meets all legal requirements, he continued. A pause. Then, it will be recognized as the governing will. No one spoke. The room just held that. I didn't feel relief, just a quiet sense of something settling into place. Marianne finally spoke. That doesn't reflect what he wanted at the end. Her voice was calm, controlled, but softer than before. Mr. Klein nodded slightly. It reflects what can be upheld. Silence again, longer this time. I looked down at the earlier document, the one that felt familiar, grounded, fair. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about taking anything from Marianne. It was about no longer being left out. I glanced up. She wasn't looking at me, just staring at the table. Still. For as long as I could remember, she had always been the one holding everything together, or at least controlling how it looked. Now, she wasn't. No one said it out loud, but it was clear. That had changed. We left without saying much, and for once, I didn't feel responsible for fixing that. A few days later, Caleb called again. So, what happens now? I looked out the window. We handle things together, I said. He was quiet. That's going to be different. Yes, I said. It is. I just don't want everything to fall apart. I thought about that. Then I said, it's not falling apart. It's just not the same. Later that evening, I sat alone in my living room, thinking about everything that led here. For years, I thought I understood my place in the family. I was the one who showed up, the one who handled things, the one who didn't make things harder. And I thought that meant I was part of the decisions. But I wasn't. I was close enough to support it, not close enough to shape it. That was the part I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had and chose not to push, because pushing meant conflict, and I didn't want that. Now things had changed anyway, but not because I fought, because I stopped stepping back. I didn't feel like I had taken anything. If anything, I had just stepped into a place that should have included me all along. I don't know what things will look like with Marianne. We haven't spoken since, and maybe that's just how it is for now. But for the first time, that doesn't feel like something I need to fix. Some things don't go back. They just move forward, differently. And this time, I'm not standing just outside of it anymore.